In a house which becomes a home, one hands down and another takes up the heritage of mind and heart, laughter and tears, musings and deeds.
Love, like a carefully loaded ship, crosses the gulf between the generations.
Therefore, we do not neglect the ceremonies of our passage, when we wed, when we die, and when we are blessed with a child.
When we depart and when we return, when we plant and when we harvest.
Let us bring up our children. It is not the place of some official to hand to them their heritage.
If others are to our children, our knowledge and ideas, they will lose all of us as worthless and full of wonder.
Let us build memories in our children, lest they drag out joyless lives, lest they allow treasures to be lost because they have not been given the keys.
We live not by things, but by the means of things. It is needful to transmit passwords from generation to generation.
Giving and receiving are linked together in the flow of the universe. In order to receive, one must first give. When we speak about the loss of innocence, it's usually within the context of children and their being exposed to some new information that we feel is too advanced for their age. However, loss of innocence is more about being exposed to new information than it is about chronological age. I believe that most everyone here is familiar with the story, the first story of the Christian Bible about Adam and Eve. Their great crime was eating the fruit from the tree of knowledge. And the Bible makes it very clear that once this happened, Adam and Eve were no longer innocent, because they then knew the difference between good and evil. They had been exposed to new information. They had gained knowledge. They were then banished from the Garden of Eden, thus setting humankind on a totally different course, lifetime after lifetime. Now, there are several heinous acts that occurred in this country over the past 50 years that dramatically began a spiraling down of the American people as a whole. The assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, Senator Robert Kennedy, and civil rights activist Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. These deaths began moving us further and further from the naivete that we held as a collective. And then the 9/11 tragedy completed the shattering of our nation's innocence. We were no strangers to mayhem and devastations, but nothing of this magnitude had been thrust upon the American people on American soil. The unthinkable had happened, and we were forever changed. We were no longer untouched, unspoiled innocence. We weren't banished from Eden, but we began to see thorns in our American paradise. The sense of security we felt living on these shores began to dissipate. We could no longer hide our heads in the sand and think that we are somehow exempt from horrors that plague so many other peoples and nations. We came to understand albeit reluctantly, that the superiority of these United States will not keep us safe. We had been touched more fully by the depths of life. When I was growing up, and I'm certain that some of you may be able to relate to this, I would hear my grandparents wax nostalgically about the good old days. According to them, in the good old days, the food was better and cheaper, neighbors were nicer and kinder, and everyone's children were polite and well-behaved. Now, I always thought that kind of reminiscence was just something my grandparents did. However, I now realize that people from that generation of Americans are called the greatest generation. They were civic-minded folks who valued hard work and sacrifice for the common good. Family worship and prayer in public places was commonplace. But I recognize that there is a continuum of a timeline with each generational shift. And the perception of the good old days becomes those days of a generation past. There's a dissonance, however, between actually living the experience and the blurred reality. There is a narrowing of vision that creates a yearning for what appeared to be a simpler time. The time seems simpler because, by and large, people as a whole were complicit in silent agreement with the majority. To phrase it differently, they maintain the status quo. Now, thinking of the past, the good old days can be very seductive, but these yearnings will never be appeased because we cannot turn back the hands of time. Postage stamps for a first-class letter cost 3 cents. And there were only 3 television stations on a good day. Most women hung clothes outside to dry. And if you lived anywhere near a factory, the clothes became sooty from polluted air as they dried. We were vulnerable in ways that you and I don't even think about today. Desires were few, fresh vegetables in the summer, and canned peaches in the winter. The bakery truck showed up once a week, and the milkman delivered bottled milk with cream on top at the doorstep. Simpler and more peaceful sounding, maybe. Yet the average age of Americans was much lower than it is today. The death rates from almost all diseases were higher because we didn't have the medical advances to deal with epidemics the way we do today. Now, there's a poem written by William Wordsworth that reads, "The earth and every common sight to me did seem apparelled in celestial light. The glory and the freshness of a dream. It is not now as it hath been of yore. Turn wheresoever I may, by night or day, the things which I have seen, I now can see no more." Now, although I think Wadsworth was yearning for something lost, as a person who comes from a traditionally marginalized community, I can certainly relate to that last line of his poem that says, "The things I have seen, I now can see no more." And that's a good thing, because I don't ever want to see the blatant segregation of the races and tolerance of the patriarchal oppression of women again. It has been less than 20 years since I purchased my first cell phone, with a mixture of pride in moving along the continuum of progress, but with some trepidation at adjusting to the totally foreign and new. However, during this time, my cache of electronic devices has grown to include everything made smaller with the possibility of a larger range of functions. Now, the critics say we live in a world where it's easier to distance ourselves behind the electronic devices. Pedophiles claiming to be peers prey on the innocent. Both men and women practice deception through dating sites. People use social media as a means of escape and isolation. However, sadly, and we all know this, all of these ills have always existed in some form, long before Steve Jobs created Apple, and Windows were just those transparent glass squares that we included in our spring cleaning. Humankind didn't lose paradise through Adam and Eve's fall from grace. And every version of Pandora and her box is interesting because we know that throughout human existence, we've always lived with attraction and repulsion, reason and emotional energy, love and hate. From these opposites spring what the religious call the duality of good and evil. Now, while you may find hashtag tweeting and the new language of texting annoying, and the very thought that anyone spending hours standing in line for the latest version of an iPad or an iPhone seems rather silly. But when disaster strikes on the other side of the world, there is an instant global connection. A study was done of social media in the East Japan earthquake and tsunami, and it was done by 3 Japanese graduate students from the Graduate School of Global Environmental Studies at Kyoto University. They found that during the 2011 earthquake, social media, such as Twitter and Facebook, served as a lifeline for directly affected individuals as a means of information sharing inside and outside of Japan. It was a more effective way of locating displaced persons and provided information on damage. Geography no longer prohibits us from reaching out and touching others. Geography no longer prohibits anyone from finding like-minded people to revel in the spirit of Unitarian Universalism. because of virtual churches like the Church of the Larger Fellowship. The CLF is one of the largest Unitarian Universalist churches in the world, offering online spiritual home through podcast, print, and video for Unitarian Universalists and others. In our current technological age, we are moving forward at an accelerated rate. And based on the world of duality that we live in, we are continuously coexisting with relativity and obsolescence. However, the poet William Blake maintains that without opposites, there is no progression. It's the responsibility of people like you, people in communities of faith, to offer healing to our broken world. And the truth of deep religious impulse is that the knowledge we attain is born of science, reason, and adversity. However, it can also stand alongside the mystery. So rather than flailing and fighting technology with all of our might, it's up to us to reach deeper for optimism, using every new operating system as a means to an end. As we tumble forward into the future, we must see in this crossroad signs for the possibility of offering love, compassion, and commitment as we move bravely into uncharted territories. Because our purpose is to bring about wholeness in all its forms: beauty, truth, compassion, and love. Now, the Sufi mystic poet Hafiz wrote, "We have not come into this exquisite world to hold ourselves hostage from love, or to confine our wondrous spirits, but to experience ever and ever more deeply our divine courage, our freedom, and our light." So let this place be one where we come to know greater love, to rediscover our innocence, to find wisdom, and through our wisdom, know what needs to be done. Because in another 20 years, this now, these days, will be those of a simpler time that future generations yearn for. Hashtag, from my heart to yours, maybe so.
That's a tough act to follow.
Good luck.
Our closing words today come from Theodore Parker. Be ours a religion which, like sunshine, goes everywhere. Its temple, all space. Its shrine, a good heart. Its creed, all truth. Its ritual, works of love. Its profession of faith, divine living.